font size and the color and whatnot. So I'm going to open this one up. CodePen start. Good. So this is what we're looking at. And let's actually go ahead and start with the main CodePen, and we're going to dice it up into different pieces. So how big are these things going to be? Well, the 4 different pieces are, I want the header to take up as much room as it needs. I want the footer to take up as much room as it needs. And then these 2 ones, I just want to sort of split the difference between the 2. And a real CodePen, you're able to resize it and whatnot because they use some JavaScript. But I did my best with just CSS. That's as far as I could get it. And there's no vertical resize. But if you like that, some JavaScript, you can. So we're going to grab our CodePen and we're going to display grid on that. Then we need to cut it up into the 4 different pieces. And in this case, it's not actually columns, it's going to be rows. So GTR, grid template rows, and we want it to be auto, the first one to be auto size, the next one to be 1FR, the next one 1FR, and then auto. And what that should do, it's a little bit hard to see it. So first we're gonna have to be closing our dev tool so we can get the full look of what it's like. And then we'll also take our CodePen, each of the direct descendants, each of the items, and we'll just put a border 1px solid black just so we can see where each of the items is. Now, this is not working because shouldn't this code assets and command, shouldn't that be at the bottom? And that's because the CodePen doesn't have a height on it, and you need an explicit height in order for it to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a height on it, and the height of that is just going to be 100 VH, which is the viewport height. That will be 100% high. And when we give that a save, you'll now see that it's sticking to the bottom, sticking to the top, and then the difference between the 2 are then split. Now let's move on. Let's do this right here, which is the editors that we have. So that has a class of code on it, and we can inspect the element real quick on that. You see we have div with a class of code, and then we have 3 items, which is editor, editor, editor for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we can display grid on that, and then we will equally size them with grid template columns. We'll repeat 3, 1FR, and that will put them all side by side. Good, I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's move up to this this head right here. So a header with a class of pen. So we'll go down here, .pen, and we need, let's look at what the different pieces of code are inside of it. We've got the pen details, and beside that we have a bunch of buttons. And this is very similar to the one that we looked at earlier when we looked at the flexbox versus the grid. I want the pen details to take up as much room as it can, minus whatever size the buttons in the avatar are in. So we'll display grid right there. Say grid template columns 1FR. We'll do the same thing that we did previously. And then grid auto flow column. And then what that will do is it will stick all the additional items to the right there. Now these are being stretched. The image is not being stretched. So we can align items center, and that will get us in a good spot for there. We'll deal with some, here we'll put a little bit of grid gap on there as well, 10px. Bump them off from each other. Good, I'm really happy with that. So that was the header. We did the code. The preview, we we've got an iframe in here. We want that to sort of span the entire place. And all we need to do for that is preview, display grid. And by default, it will be one column by one column. And the default item is stretch. So there's nothing else that we need to do for that specific one. And then the settings here is there's no need to do grid. So good. We just did the entire layout here by just saying grid 3 times and laying them out. Now let's go get into each of the individual ones and start working with it. So let's start at the top here and start some styling on some amazing pen name. And that, again, that is our pen. So I'll do background, black, border bottom, 5px solid. And the code pen color is 343436. And that's actually a color we use fairly often. So let's put that into a variable called gray. And then let's go up to the top here on the root selector and set the variable gray to be that. Oh, did I spell it wrong? G-R-E-Y. Good. In Canada, sometimes we spell it with an A. And a padding of 10px on that header. Good. Now our header's looking in pretty good shape. I'm pretty happy with that. It's all nicely aligned. Let's go ahead and style the buttons. And they each have a class of button. So the background of each of our buttons is going to be the variable gray. Border 0, color white, padding 10px, and a border radius, 10px. No, that's too much. 5px, good, and a font size of 15px. Awesome, looking pretty good to me. We also have the concept of small buttons down here. So what I'm going to do to that is say anything with a button that has a small on it, we're simply just going to change the font size to 12 and make the padding 4px. Good. We got these little buttons down here and these little buttons here, and then these are our regular large buttons. Good. Also, this button right here has a class of dirty on it. If you look at the answer here, it'll give us this little whoop. So what we can do is select a button that has a dirty state. And in order to get this little line right here, what I've done is I've used a before attribute. So say before, and the background to that is going to be yellow. It's my yellow FFC600. And we'll do the whole song and dance if you've used a before. So say display block, content, nothing, height, 2px, width. It's going to be 100%, but we don't want it to go all the way across here. Let's actually look at what we're dealing with there. That looks pretty good, but we're going to make it position absolute. And from the left, it's going to be 3px. So now we run into a bit of an issue where it's going all the way across. So we go back up to our button and make that position relative, and that will put it inside of it. But the problem is that if the button is 100% wide, then it goes all the way across. But we want it to start from 3 pixels over. So really, we want it 100 pixels less 6, 3 pixels on each side. So we can use calc for that. So 100% minus 6px. Looking good. And then top 3px as well. Good. I'm happy with that. Now let's move on to these editors here. Each editor in itself, if we open some of those up, open up the code, go into the editor. The editor header itself needs to be side by side. So if we look at this editor header, we've got the little drop down on the right, whereas the rest of the items are over here. So the way we can do that is grab the editor header, display grid on that, and we will give ourselves 3 columns, auto, 1FR, and auto. And what that should do is the middle item here the CSS, that will span as wide as it needs to, less the size of the buttons on the right and the left. Good, but I don't want All right, let's talk about how to get sort of a bootstrap CSS grid in place. And while I think that you should try to, I always tell people to embrace the flex, meaning grid is by nature very flexible, very responsive, very able to sort of flex to the actual size of the content, as well as how much extra space is around, whereas these bootstrap-based grids are extremely rigid in that you have 12 columns and you start to add them up. So first of all, try to maybe adjust your design so that they work with how much content you have. But that said, there is still valid use cases for having a very rigid grid system. So what you can do is I've got this 4 items here. I'm going to go to my grid and chop it up into 12 different columns. So we'll go in here and we'll say grid template column, repeat 12, 1FR, and we will also forget the display grid on the actual item itself. Good. Now, and we'll put some grid gap on there. Beautiful. Now we've got 12 different columns, each one eating itself up. Now I'm going to show you one little bug that I ran into. I'm not sure if it's a bug or by design or whatever, but if one of these things has like West Boss in it and it's a bit wider, you'll notice that now they are not equal, because what does FR stand for? Free space, right? And what happens is the CSS grid lays the items out that it needs to first, and then we'll distribute the rest of the spots to it. So this is eating into our free space. So what do you have to do? Do you have to take your 100% divided by 12 and make each one 8.3%? Well, that still doesn't really work because you've got this grid gap. So do you have to calc 8.3% minus 20px? Well, that also doesn't work because there's no margin on the left or the right. So, or clack, you get the point, right? It's not ideal to have to be able to do something like that. So what I have found as a fix for that is either you can go onto your item and give yourself a min width of 0, and that will make each one actually the same size. And then you can deal with any overflowing text or whatever accordingly, which is great. Or, and let me just double check that looks the same in Chrome. Yeah, so it works in Chrome as well. But I think ideally you would do something like this instead. So let's bring back that actual error here. And we will do a min max, and you give it a min width of 0 and a max of 1FR. That will give it a min width of 0. And then, however, we still have to go onto our item and give it a width of 100%. And that will snap it back to what we're looking for. So either one will work for you. Sometimes you're already going to be using min max, so you can use that and just pop the width on there. Otherwise, you can pop a min width and a width on each individual one. Let's go back to Chrome, double check that's still looking exactly the same. Good. Now that we have this, what we can do is we can start to go spanning our different items. And one cool way that we could do that is with CSS variables. So you could make a whole grid framework, and I'm sure there will be lots of frameworks announced where you have like span 3 or something like that, and that will span 3 for you. But we could also do something like this. We could say grid column, and that is going to just span 1. And each one of those will span 1. That's the actual default. But we could change that to a variable, where we could make a variable called span and set that to be 1. And then set that variable here to be span. And then in each of your items, you can overwrite that variable with an inline style attribute. You could say something like -- span 3. And then it's going to override that span variable on the item, and it's going to kick in to there. So whatever you feel like. I think some people still might prefer just a nice clean class of span 3, but it's kind of neat that you can also use CSS variables in order to dice it up. Similarly, you could also use that on your grid, where you say style, and you could say -- calls, is equal to 10. And if I only wanted 10 columns, I could go into here and I could then say right here, var dash dash calls, and that will give me 10. And I believe var will also give you a fallback. So if it's not there, you can fall back to 12 rather than having to set a variable like I did here. I'll just show you two different ways that we can do it. So there we go, that's 10. And if I were to remove the number of columns that we have, then it will fall back to 12. That is how you do a rigid bootstrap grid. Let's actually fill this up here. So 7. Good. So we've filled up all of our spots here. And then in this one, let's actually do another nested grid inside of it. So we'll go say .grid. And then inside of that, we'll have items. Maybe we'll say style equals dash dash calls 2. Item times 2, 1, and 2. And that will dice up it further into columns 1 and 2. You will get the sort of the double grid gap happening here. And if you would like to get rid of that, so you have clean lines, you can use a negative margin that would offset it the same amount of the grid gap. So hopefully that helps. I'm still not sure if people are going to migrate more towards using a CSS grid framework, like maybe Foundation or whatever will come out with one, or if this will just be enough. And for myself, I haven't used a grid framework in many years just because I think that it's easier to do it with Flexbox, but that's another personal choice that you can make yourself. All right, let's make a responsive website. This thing is a little bit flashy with all the pink and yellow, but please bear with the design. So what we're going to be doing here is we've got our standard website and it's got a number of different sections. We have this sort of hero image here. We've got these calls to action with some sales. We have a responsive navigation that's happening. We've got your standard columns with your features. We got like about or featured tacos spot here, and then like a little spot for your Instagrams at the bottom. And as I resize this, well, first of all, the menu is going to move from being right here to when you get maybe it's sort of mobile size, it's going to move up top. We're going to be able to open and close that with a little bit of JavaScript. And then as you get smaller, you'll see that these features right here will automatically resize themselves, but the top value here is going to rearrange itself to sort of 1 by 2, and then eventually we're going to put those 2 underneath, and then at a certain point everything will go down to 1 column because we're sort of on mobile for that value. So let's get started here. Open up this responsive. We've got all the different sections here. So we've got top. We got menu, we got features, we've got about, and we have gallery. So those are sort of the 5 pieces that are all direct descendants of this wrapper. element here. And then if we open up responsive start, this is where we're working right here. I also have responsive start.css, and this doesn't have much in it. We do have that base styling, which gives us this background, but I've just bumped up the font size. I've styled the button already, and I put a max width on our images so that they don't spill outside of any of our containers that we have. Good. So let's start from top down. We'll start with the top section. And I also want you to open up your dev tools just so we can see exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to go to layout. There's no grids yet, but if we display grid on this sucker, it's going to show up, and we'll turn that on. And I want them to look a little bit something like this. Now, instead of actually defining the columns here, I'm going to use grid template areas where we can name them. And that's That's gonna be really handy when we get to responsive, because we can just rearrange the actual grid. So let's say grid template areas, and I want them to be, it's gonna look like this: hero, hero, CTA1, and then the next one is hero, hero, CTA2, and that should put them sort of side by side. Hero is going to take up 2 heights, and the CTA 1 and CTA 2 are going to take up their value. So it doesn't look great here. That's because we need to go ahead and select them now. So the hero is just going to be grid area hero. And there we go. So it's starting to look a little nicer. And these will automatically fall into place, but let's explicitly place them. So CTA 1 is going to be the grid area CTA 1. And obviously the next one's going to be 2. Good. And it won't change anything, but we can see them showing up. Let's go and style this hero value that we have here. So we'll select that hero. Actually, did we already select it? We did right here. So we're going to put a min height on it of 400 px. Beautiful. We're going to put a background on it of white, and we're going to use a URL images / taco.jpg. Looking good. Background size cover. Beautiful. We'll background position it into the bottom right. So sort of anchor it off of that taco. So if we get a lot bigger, that taco image is going to anchor itself in the bottom right-hand corner. And we'll put a little bit of padding on that as well. Beautiful. Now let's work with these this text here. I want to get it to look like this, where it's actually in the middle to the right. And I had initially done this with grid, but this is actually a perfect use case for Flexbox. So let me show you here. Let's first grab those hero items, and we'll put a background color, which is a yellow. Good. And the design I want is that I just want them to be as wide as the text is, right? But the problem is that they are grid items. They're not inside of like a wrapper. They are themselves grid items. So if we look at the HTML here, you'll see that our grid is our grid would be the hero. We would display grid on that. And then the H1 and the paragraph tag are going to be our grid item. So let's actually try to do that. So let's go back to our hero, and we'll say display grid. And we justify content center. That will actually start. Beautiful. And align content center. That puts them right where I want them. The problem is that because it's column based, if we take it off the top and turn on the header, the columns are just going to be as wide as the longest one. And I want this yellow to stop exactly right here. And that's just how it works. One column is always going to be as wide as the other. So this is a perfect use case. Instead of using grid, we're going to display flex on that item. We're going to say flex direction column. So they go top to bottom. And we would say justify items center. No, let me take these off. I really don't know what they do. I just try align items center. No, align items start or flex start, and justify items center. No, justify content center. There we go. That's exactly what I want. I put a little bit of padding, 5px on those. Beautiful. That's exactly what we want. That's a good use case for using Flexbox over CSS Grid when you want each of them to be a variable width. Now let's go on to these call call to action values here. So say anything with a class of call to action on it. Background is going to be that yellow that we like to use. Beautiful. Put a little bit of on our top value. We'll put a grid gap of 20 px on it so they're not butting up totally against each other. Now I want to perfectly center all of the text right inside of here. So we'll go back down to our CTA and we'll display grid right on those. So we'll say align items center and justify items center. And that will center them for us. Alternatively, we could just said place items center center. And there's a little bit of, let's turn on the grid for one of these. You see that they are stretching to whatever the height is. And in this value, I want them to be suctioned into the actual middle. So for that, we are going to justify content, or no, sorry, align content center, and that will put them right in the middle. There is a little bit of margin on them, so we'll say CTAP margin 0, and that will get rid of them. See how I like to have them just right bang in the middle, regardless of how high the value is available to us. So that's a good use case for that. I'm going to take the price. So sorry, I'll put this down here. Anything with a class of price, font size 60 px. Beautiful. And we'll just put font weight of 300 on that. Good. That's looking good. That whole top value is done for us. Let's move on to doing the navigation. So we'll go ahead and select the menu UL. And we want all of these items here, the taco, beer, wine, dessert, we want them to take up as much space as they can. And that's a good use for our min-max. So we'll say grid template columns, repeat, auto fit, min-max. We want the minimum to be 100 pixels, the maximum to be 1 FR. So let's see where that gets us. Nowhere, because I did not display grid on that. Awesome, looking good. We can take off all of the padding, margin, and we can say list style none. and that will get rid of the dots that we have there. And then instead of styling the LIs, we're actually going to style the links. So we'll say dot menu A, background, the yellow value that we like. Now, what's going on with each of these? Why are they not spreading all the way across? Well, display block on those links and they'll go all the way across, because by default links are inline and they just go as wide as they need to be, but we want them to be block and they will take up all the space we have. Text decoration, none. Padding, 10px, text align center, color, that block.